Hi, Anna here with Growing Chefs Ontario, and today we're making lasagna. Before we get started, make sure that you've watched the other videos on hand washing and also our knife safety, because we do use a little bit of knife work in this recipe. So before we get started, let's wash our hands. So today we're making lasagna. This recipe is great to make ahead and put in the freezer. It'll just take a little bit longer to bake when you pull it out, so just make sure you're monitoring that. This lasagna is also vegetarian, which means it's great for a party with people with lots of different food preferences. But you could also add in meat if you prefer as well. Just make sure that you cook it ahead of time. Okay, so to get started, we're gonna prep our vegetables. We're going to grate carrot to put into our spaghetti sauce, just to add a little bit more nutrition. I want to start by peeling it. I'm going to take off a little bit of the end, and then I'm going to grate it. So I'm holding my hand firmly on the grater and on my carrot. You want to be careful that you don't slip, because you can hurt yourself. And stop grating wherever you stop to feel safe when your fingers start to get too close to the grater. Our recipe calls for half a cup. That looks like half a cup. The rest of your shredded carrot works really well in salads or in a smoothie, or if you're feeling adventurous, you can make some carrot cake. The last thing we need for our sauce is just a little bit of Italian seasoning, or you could use oregano and thyme, about half a teaspoon. I'm using a homemade tomato sauce today, which you can use. We're using 6 cups, or you can definitely use a jar of pre-seasoned tomato sauce as well. I'm just gonna stir it all together. Make sure that you taste all the components of your lasagna. So that means taste your sauce, taste your ricotta mixture. Make sure that the seasoning is good in all of them. It's good. All right, so our tomato sauce component is finished. Next, we're gonna finish cutting up the rest of our vegetables that are going to go in the lasagna, and then we're gonna make our ricotta mixture. So for my zucchini, there's 2 different ways that we can cut this zucchini. We can either cut it into rounds, thin rounds, like this, and just lay them out in our lasagna, or we can cut them thin to replicate the lasagna noodles. So this would be more of an advanced option. Make sure that you're using your claw. I've just cut off a little bit so I can roll my zucchini flat. And then cut it in as thin as strips as you can. And just be patient with it, because it does take some time to line up your knife and cut down straight. I'm just going to do the same with the other one. So I'm just cutting off a little bit at the bottom to act as my base so it doesn't roll around. And then cutting thin strips. If you were going to do the coins, do the same thing. Cut off a little bit at the bottom so it doesn't move around. And then just cut down into thin coins. We want all of our vegetables to cook evenly, so make sure that everything is the same thickness. For our mushrooms, I'm just going to cut off the dried out bottom. And then I'm going to cut it into thin strips, about the same width or thickness as our zucchini. The recipe does call for specific measurements of our vegetables, but if you're trying to use up the last bit of everything, don't worry about going over because more vegetables never hurt anybody. So my zucchini's ready, my mushrooms are ready, and now it's time to make our ricotta mixture. All right, so ricotta is a fresh cheese. We're using 2 cups of ricotta. And you can actually make ricotta at home if you have some extra milk and some lemon juice. Into my ricotta, I'm going to add spinach. If you are using, you can use frozen spinach for this as well, but make sure that you thaw it and you squeeze out all the moisture because there's a lot of liquid in frozen spinach that we don't want. With this fresh spinach, I'm going to use about twice as much because when it cooks, it really shrinks down and frozen spinach is already cooked. And just do your best to sort of fold it in by scooping to the bottom of the bowl and bringing it on top. You're probably going to have to do this in stages. If you're not using baby spinach, you probably want to cook your spinach ahead of time too, and make sure that you squeeze out all the moisture out of that. Our ricotta mixture also has 2 eggs in it, and 2 eggs will cook with our lasagna and actually help to give it more structure. Ricotta is kind of a bit of a watery cheese as well. So this cheese doesn't have any additional salt in it, so I'm going to, before I add my eggs, because they're raw, I'm going to try this. Adding some salt, a little pinch of pepper. I'm just going to give that a good mix before I add my eggs. Okay. So for my eggs, I'm going to crack them into a separate bowl first, just so I can watch for any shell that I might get in there. I'm just going to pre-mix it up a little bit before I add it to my ricotta mixture. And then same thing, I'm just going to gently fold in my eggs. Now we're ready to start layering our lasagna. But first I want to clean up my space because if you clean as you go, it means there's less dishes at the end. Another thing to mention as well is about our noodles. So you can buy dried but pre-cooked lasagna noodles that you don't need to cook before you use them in a lasagna. Or if you're using a traditional lasagna noodle, you need to make sure that you cook it in salted water for about 7 to 9 minutes or whatever's on the package. And make sure that you're stirring it as you cook it because they're fairly big noodles that can stick together quite easily. And when they're all cooked, make sure you lay them out flat with a little bit of oil so they don't stick to each other on the plate. So to start layering our lasagna, you want to start with about half a cup of sauce spread out on the bottom, and this just stops our noodles from sticking. I'm gonna layer in some noodles. It's okay if there's too much noodle. You can just tear that off because you might need it somewhere else. I also cooked extra noodles when I was boiling these in case I had some that broke or stuck in my pot. And now for the fun part. Start by adding a good few scoops of sauce. I'm going to use about 1.5 cups here because I like a saucy lasagna. And try to be as even as possible because you have to think this is going to serve a bunch of people and you want everyone to have the same amount of everything in their portion. So next you can kind of layer it however you want. I'm going to put in my mushrooms. I'm using about half of the mushrooms that I have here. Kind of push it into the sauce. Next, I'm going to add my zucchini. And my ricotta mixture. Actually, I'm going to layer in some cheese. This is 3 cups of cheese. You can add some Parmesan for a little extra flavor, but this is optional. And my ricotta mixture. It might be a little difficult to spread, that's okay. Just try to plop it around and spread it out. And aim for about half of the mixture. And make sure that you press everything out to the edges because they're going to get eaten too. All right, next it's time for our next level, next layer of noodles. If you don't want to use noodles, you could cut more things the same way as I cut the zucchini, such as thin slices of sweet potato to act as your noodles as well. But you want to make sure that they're thin enough that they'll cook with everything in your lasagna. You might have to press it down a little bit. You want everything to be nice and compacted. This is also why it's important that your hands are clean. Now, this time when I layer, I want to make sure that the last thing I use is my cheese, because that's what's going to be really nice and bubbly on the top and what gives lasagna that beautiful look. The rest of my mushrooms. This layer I'll put in my zucchini rounds. My ricotta mixture. Parmesan cheese. And my last layer of cheese. I'm going to bake this in a 350-degree oven covered with aluminum foil for about 30 minutes. Then I'm going to uncover it for the last 15 minutes, and that is what is going to make our cheese look very bubbly and delicious. I'm also going to bake this on a baking sheet because it could be that my sauce bubbles up and overflows and I don't want to clean my oven. All right, we're ready for the oven. So our lasagna is ready. You can see we have some beautiful browning on the top with the cheese. And I'm really glad that I put it on another baking sheet because I definitely had some overflow of sauce. So after it comes out of the oven, you want to make sure that you let it sit for about 10 minutes. You have to be patient because all the cheese and sauce and everything in here has to set up. If I were to cut this right out of the oven, it would just go all over the plate. So to serve, I have a few different tools here that I'm going to try because sometimes it can be a little tricky to lift stuff out of this pan. I'm going to take my paring knife and divide it up depending on how many people that you're trying to serve. So using my paring knife, just going to try and cut and you might have to go around the edges as well in case it was sticking. And remember, we've got all those vegetables in there, so we need to make sure that we cut through all of those vegetables. So as you can see, all of our different layers in here, which is great, and a nice crusty cheesy top. Enjoy!